Don't come in.
It began with a lake, calm, still, and so perfectly classy that the trees above seemed to grow downward, their branches sinking deep into the mirrored water. That's why we chose it. There were 5 of us that autumn weekend. Me, Daniel, his girlfriend Chloe, our friend Ryan, and Mia. We wanted peace, wanted to escape city noise, wanted a cabin that looked like it belonged in an old postcard. The cabin stood just off the lake's edge. A crooked deck reached toward the water, and at night the moon spilled across the surface like silver paint. We thought it was beautiful. We thought it was safe, but beauty can hide danger, and safety can vanish in a blink. The first night was easy. We laughed, made dinner, played cards by lantern light. Later, we sat on the deck, watching the lake shimmer under a clear sky. But that's when Chloe noticed it. "The water," she whispered. "It's not right." We leaned forward. At first it looked normal, just our reflections rippling in the surface, our shadows long and stretched by lantern glow. But then Daniel frowned. "Wait," he said, "count." We did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but in the lake 6. A 6th reflection, not one of us. It stood just behind Mia's mirrored figure, tall and thin. Its outline warped, but undeniably human. Mia whipped around, but the dock was empty, only the woods, only shadows. When we looked back down, the reflection was gone. We tried to laugh it off, saying it must have been a trick of the light, the water playing games with us. But unease clung to the air long after we went to bed. The second day, the woods were silent, too silent. No bird calls, no wind in the branches, no buzzing of insects. The lake itself felt stranger than before. The water was darker, heavier somehow, swallowing light instead of reflecting it. Mia wouldn't go near it. She said every time she glanced at the surface, she saw someone watching her. That night things grew worse. We sat around the campfire, but the glow didn't feel warm. The woods pressed in like a living wall, branches shifting though no wind blew. And then, from the lake, came the sound. Not splashing, not waves, crying, soft, low, and rising from the black water. Ryan grabbed a flashlight, but the beam only stretched so far. It caught the rippling surface, the deck, and then there, a figure, standing in the middle of the lake. Its reflection was sharp and perfect, but the water around its legs stayed still, undisturbed. "Do you see it?" Chloe whispered. But none of us answered. We were too afraid. When Daniel swung the flashlight back, nothing. The lake was empty, but the crying continued. We barely slept that night, and when morning came, the lake was gone. Where it had stretched wide and endless, there was now only an empty hollow, mud cracked and dry, as if no water had touched it for centuries. The deck reached into nothing. The air smelled of rot, wet earth exposed too long. We stood frozen, staring, trying to understand. "This isn't possible," Ryan muttered. "Water doesn't just disappear." But it had. And then Chloe pointed at the mud. Footprints, dozens of them. Barefoot, leading straight to the cabin. Panic clawed at us. We tried to pack, to leave, but the forest wouldn't let us. Every path bent wrong, leading us back to the empty lake. The cabin loomed like a trap we couldn't escape. At dusk, the crying returned. But now it came from under the cabin. We pressed our ears to the floor, and sure enough, the sound rose through the wood. Sobbing, faint scratching, like fingernails raking from below. Daniel grabbed a lantern and stormed outside. determined to find an entrance. The rest of us followed, though fear weighed heavy, and beneath the cabin's deck, we found it. A trapdoor, old wood, rusted hinges, and a lock that had been broken recently. We shouldn't have opened it. We knew that. But Daniel lifted the door anyway. The smell hit first, damp, foul, like earth long sealed away. A ladder descended into darkness. The crying echoed louder now, bouncing off unseen walls. One by one, lantern light trembling, we climbed down. The space below wasn't a basement. It was a tunnel. Carved dirt walls stretched in both directions, leading away into black, and the crying moved, always just ahead, always out of reach. We chased it deeper and deeper, until the air grew tight and cold. That's when we found the first one. A figure slumped against the wall, skin pale, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a silent scream. A body, long dead but perfectly preserved. Chloe gagged, Ryan stumbled back, and then we saw them all. Dozens. Bodies pressed into the earth walls, their faces frozen in terror, as if they'd been buried alive, watching, waiting. The crying had stopped, but the silence was worse. Then Mia screamed. We spun, lantern shaking, and saw why. Behind us, the tunnel had collapsed. The way back was gone. And in the shifting dirt of the collapse, a hand reached out, pale, thin, fingers curling upward. The crying started again, this time right behind us. We ran, through the tunnels, through twisting halls that bent impossibly. The lantern sputtered, shadows stretched, and then light, ahead. We burst into the open air, gasping, falling into mud. The lake was back, full, black, perfectly still. But it wasn't reflecting us anymore. In its surface, we saw them, the bodies from the tunnels, their pale faces watching, crying, begging. And behind them, a sixth reflection, closer than ever, reaching. We left the cabin that night, or thought we did. The road bent wrong. The trees closed in. No matter how far we walked, no matter how many turns we took, we always ended back at the lake, waiting, silent, watching. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear it. The crying from the water, from the mud, from the reflection that doesn't belong. The first time we saw the cabin, it looked almost normal. We'd been hiking for hours, our packs heavy, our legs sore, and the idea of shelter, even an abandoned one, felt like a blessing. The cabin stood in a clearing, its roof intact, its chimney leaning slightly, but still upright. The wood was old, dark with age, but not falling apart like so many others we had passed in the forest. "Looks safe enough," Mark said, adjusting his pack. His voice was steady, but I could see the same hunger in his eyes that burned in mine. We wanted rest, warmth, a roof. None of us questioned it. None of us thought about how strange it was to find a cabin so deep in the woods, miles from the nearest road, with no paths leading to or from it. We just went inside. The air smelled stale, like dust and damp wood. But it was dry, warmer than outside. The furniture was old but intact. A table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, a single bed pushed against the wall. It felt almost inviting. We decided to stay the night. At first, everything was fine. We lit a fire in the hearth, cooked some instant noodles, and laughed about our luck. The storm that rolled in after dusk made us even more grateful. Rain hammered the roof, wind screamed through the trees. But inside the cabin, we were safe, warm, together. It was only when we tried to sleep that I noticed it. The walls, they weren't just dark with age. In the firelight, I saw streaks, faint, reddish-brown stains that ran from the ceiling to the floor. At first, I thought it was water damage. Old leaks, maybe, but when I leaned closer, the truth hit me like ice. It was blood. Mark must have seen my face, because he asked what was wrong. I shook my head. I didn't want to scare anyone. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. Smears, handprints, shapes like something had been dragged across the wall. I lay awake that night, every creak of the cabin settling, making me flinch. Rain pounded, the fire hissed low, and I kept my eyes on those walls. And then, the sound came, a scratching, slow, deliberate, from inside the walls. My breath caught. I strained to listen, scratch, pause and scratch, like nails dragging along wood. I nudged Mark, whispering if he heard it too, but he was asleep, snoring softly, oblivious. The sound went on for what felt like hours. I didn't sleep, not until the first light of dawn broke through the cracks in the shutters. When we woke, I told myself it had been my imagination. Nerves. The cabin was old, full of mice, maybe rats. That had to be it. But then Sarah screamed. She had been washing her face in a bowl of rainwater when she saw it. The walls. They were clean, no stains, no blood. I rushed over. She was right. Every streak I had seen the night before was gone. The wood looked untouched, old but ordinary. Mark laughed it off, said I was seeing things, and Sarah tried to believe it. But I knew what I had seen. That night it came again. We had just settled in. The storm. Outside even worse than before. When the stains returned, they seeped through the wood as we watched, blooming across the walls like fresh paint, deep red and wet. The smell hit us next. Coppery, sharp, the smell of blood. We stood frozen, staring as the walls bled. The fire sputtered, shadows danced wildly, and the scratching started again. Louder this time, closer. Sarah begged to leave, but the storm made it impossible. Rain hammered so hard the roof shook. The forest outside was a black wall of chaos. We had no choice but to stay. None of us slept. At some point, Mark swore he saw movement in the corner of the room. A shadow darker than the rest, shifting, pulsing like it was breathing. I didn't want to look. I kept my eyes on the fire, feeding it wood, praying for dawn. And when dawn came, the blood was gone. Again, the walls looked clean, the smell had vanished, but the scratches remained. Deep grooves scored the wood where none had been before, long and jagged, like something trapped inside had clawed its way to the surface. We left that morning. We didn't even eat. We packed in silence, shouldered our gear, and walked into the wet, miserable forest without looking back. But I'll never forget what happened as we reached the edge of the clearing. The storm had finally broken. Sunlight pierced the trees. The cabin stood behind us, still and quiet. And right before I turned away, I saw the walls bleed again. Not faintly, not slowly. This time the blood poured, running down in thick streams, splattering the grass at its base. Sarah screamed. Mark dragged her forward, and I forced myself not to look again. We walked for hours, days maybe, until we finally reached the road. We never spoke about it, not once. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I smell that copper tang. I hear the scratching in the walls, and I wonder what would have happened if we had stayed one more night. The forest at night had a way of swallowing sound. Even though I was surrounded by 20 other soldiers, all camped in a tight cluster of tents, I felt alone the moment the sun went down. The army had sent us deep into the woods for a week-long training exercise, far from any town, road, or sign of life. The trees stood like black pillars in every direction. their branches twisting high overhead, blotting out the moon. The further the night fell, the more I realized how much I hated the silence. The air was damp, cool, and heavy with mist. By the time we had set up camp and eaten, my shoulders ached from the weight of the gear, and every muscle in my legs begged for rest. We wolfed down rations under the weak glow of our headlamps, then retreated into our sleeping bags, the campfire sputtering quietly at the center of the tents. Inside my tent, I lay awake staring at the fabric ceiling. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to shut down. Something about this forest unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just being far from civilization. It was the way the night pressed in around us, thick and suffocating. The only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. No birds, no crickets, just emptiness. That was when I first heard it. A low, steady thumping. At first I thought I was imagining it, some distant echo carried by the trees, but as I lay there holding my breath, it came again. Heavy, deliberate, like something massive striking the ground. Thump, thump, thump. It was too slow and heavy for a deer, too rhythmic for the wind. My pulse quickened. I sat up, unzipped the tent an inch, and peered out. The fire had burned down to embers, throwing faint orange light over the clearing. Mist coiled through the trees, thickening the shadows until I could barely see beyond the first row of trunks. Nothing moved. The other tents were still, zip tight. Everyone else was asleep, but the sound didn't stop. Thump, thump, thump. It came from deeper in the forest, just beyond the glow of the fire. Against every instinct, I reached for my flashlight and pulled on my boots. Some part of me screamed to stay put, to wake the others, but curiosity, or maybe the soldier in me, pushed me forward. I stepped out of the tent, the cold mist clinging to my uniform, and swept the light around camp. Nothing, only shadows. The noise persisted, steady and calm, like something working in the dark. I swallowed hard and started walking toward it. Every step made the sound louder. The trees seemed to crowd closer, their branches curling downward like fingers. The mist thickened until it curled around my knees. My boots sank slightly into damp soil. I kept the flashlight beam steady, but the cone of light felt small, fragile, against the black wall of forest. And then I noticed the ground. The earth was disturbed. The leaves and dirt had been dragged aside, forming ragged furrows that led deeper between the trees. My chest tightened. Something had been working here, clawing, pulling, moving the earth. Still, I pressed on, the thumping guiding me like a heartbeat. At last, the trees opened into a small clearing. In the center stood a massive, twisted oak. Its bark was dark and gnarled, roots jutting from the soil like skeletal fingers. The noise came from behind it. I crept around the trunk, flashlight shaking in my grip. That's when I saw it. A pit, 10 feet wide, just as deep. The edges were raw and uneven, the dirt freshly turned, as though someone had been digging with inhuman strength. At the bottom, something moved. My light trembled as I angled it downward. It was a figure. At first, I thought it was an animal. Its body, caked in mud, skin stretched tight over sinewy muscles. But no, it was human. Or at least it had been. Its movements were slow, deliberate, mechanical. It crouched low, heaving something out of the earth, a thick root, or maybe a branch, and slammed it against the side of the pit. Thump, 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 the sound I had followed. The figure's body glistened with moisture, mud streaking every inch of skin. Its face was obscured beneath clumps of dirt and matted hair. It wasn't just digging, it was searching. The bottom of the pit was littered with things. Bones, some snapped in half. Bits of fabric, rotted and torn. Rusted metal. Things that looked like old wooden boards. It was a grave, or rather, dozens of graves, unearthed and tossed together into one monstrous whole. My chest tightened, panic threatening to take over. The figure let out a guttural groan, the sound vibrating in my chest. Slowly, it raised its head, as if sensing me above. My flashlight beam caught its face. Its eyes were hollow pits. Its mouth hung open, caked in soil. Its chest heaved with each breath, but the movements were wrong, jerky, unnatural, like a puppet struggling against its strings. I staggered back, boot crunching a twig. The sound snapped through the clearing like a gunshot. The figure froze. Then, with a sudden violent motion, it hurled the root aside and began clawing its way up the side of the pit. I ran. Branches whipped at my face, tearing my skin. The mist clung to me, slowing me down. My flashlight beam bounced wildly across trunks and undergrowth, barely showing the path. Behind me, I heard it, scraping, dragging. The thump of hands and feet pulling against the soil. It was climbing out. I crashed through the forest, lungs burning, until the faint glow of our campfire came into view. I burst back into camp, gasping, collapsing to my knees. My hands shook as I tried to catch my breath. The noise behind me stopped. The woods fell silent again, so silent that I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I stared into the trees, waiting for it to follow. Nothing came. No movement. No sound. I didn't wake the others. I didn't tell them what I had seen. At first light, we packed up camp and moved on. No one questioned it, though I was, pale and quiet. My eyes fixed on the tree line, but the memory clung to me like a disease. The pit, the bones, the thing digging with its bare hands. That sound never left me. The steady rhythm of earth being broken over and over. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods, I swear I hear it again. Thump, 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 and I know. If I ever follow it again, I won't come back. The road ended long before I expected it to. Gravel gave way to dirt, dirt to mud, and mud eventually to nothing at all. My truck sat idling under a canopy of twisted trees, headlights cutting a narrow path into the shadows. Beyond them, the forest pressed close, thick and impenetrable, like it wanted to swallow me whole. I killed the engine. Silence. A silence so deep, it felt heavy, almost physical. The army had sent me here for a weekend of survival training. No instructors, no fellow soldiers, no radios. Just me, my gear, and the endless forest. The idea was to test how we handled isolation, how we could navigate and endure with nothing but instinct. At first, I welcomed it. After months of drills, shouting sergeants, and overcrowded barracks, the thought of being alone sounded like a relief. I hiked in with my pack, following a thin animal trail that wound through the woods until it broke into a clearing. That was when I saw the lake. It spread wide and still under the pale sky, a sheet of black glass framed by jagged pines. Mist hovered over its surface, clinging low like breath in cold air. It should have been beautiful, should have felt peaceful. Instead, the sight filled me with unease I couldn't shake. I set up camp near the tree line, close enough to see the water, but far enough back that the chill mist wouldn't seep into my tent. As the light faded, I built a small fire, its flames licking at the dusk, and tried to relax. But the silence hung heavy. No birds, no insects. Just the occasional ripple across the lake, as if something disturbed the water from beneath. That night, I lay in my sleeping bag listening. I should have been exhausted, but my eyes refused to close. The fire had burned low, throwing weak orange across the trees. And then I heard it. Footsteps, not animal, human. They crunched softly in the leaves, circling the edge of my camp. I froze, every muscle tense, straining to hear slow, deliberate steps, too heavy to be anything else. My hand slid to the knife strapped at my side. The steps circled once, twice, then stopped. Silence again. I waited, breath shallow, ears ringing. Minutes passed. Eventually, exhaustion won. I drifted into uneasy sleep, clutching the knife. When I woke, pale dawn filtered through the trees. I stepped out of my tent, the damp air sharp in my lungs. That's when I noticed them. Footprints. Clear human footprints pressed deep into the mud, circling my camp. They stopped just outside my tent door. Whoever or whatever had been there last night had been standing right over me. I told myself it was part of the training. Maybe the instructors were messing with me, testing my nerves. But the more I studied the tracks, the less I believed it. The feet were bare, the toes long, spread wide, like they hadn't worn shoes in years. A shiver crawled down my spine. I decided to move camp further inland. I hiked deeper into the forest, keeping the lake at my back. That's when I saw the cabin. It stood crooked among the trees, its roof sagging, windows shattered. The wood was dark with age, half rotted, like it hadn't seen life in decades. My first instinct was to avoid it altogether, but curiosity rooted me to the spot. Why was it here? Miles from the nearest road, hidden deep in the forest? I pushed open the door. The hinges groaned like something in pain. Inside, the air was thick with dust and mold. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor. A chair, a table with one leg missing, shelves lined with jars that had long since clouded with age. And then there was the writing. Dark smears covered the walls. At first, I thought it was dirt, but the longer I looked, the more certain I became. It was blood, dried and flaking, scrawled into symbols I didn't recognize. Circles, jagged lines, twisted shapes. Words, maybe, in some language I'd never seen. The air grew colder as I stared at them. My breath fogged in front of my face. I turned to leave when the floorboards above me creaked. Something was upstairs. My stomach dropped. The cabin had looked abandoned, ruined. But someone, or something, was still here. My knife felt pathetically small as I gripped it tight. Slowly, I backed out the door, heart hammering. The woods outside seemed darker than before. The mist thickened, curling low around my ankles. And that's when I heard it. Soft, wet breathing, coming from just behind me. I spun. Nothing. Just the cabin. Its doorway yawning black. I didn't wait. I ran. Branches whipped at my face, roots snagged my boots, but I didn't stop until the lake came back into view. My lungs burned, my chest tight, but I felt safer by the open water, away from the suffocating trees. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire, knife in hand, eyes locked on the tree line. Every now and then, ripples disturbed the lake's surface, spreading out in slow circles. But I never saw what caused them. At some point, exhaustion blurred my vision. My head nodded forward, and that's when I saw it. Across the lake, standing half shrouded in mist, was a figure, tall, thin, still. It stood at the water's edge watching me. My blood turned to ice. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. the figure was gone. But when I looked down, fresh wet footprints led from the water to the edge of my camp. I never made it through the weekend. At first light, I packed my gear and left, hiking without rest until I reached my truck. I never looked back at the lake, never searched for the cabin again. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I swear I hear those footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, following. And I wonder if the figure by the lake ever really stayed there.